Joining Ben for today's final interview is FCC Chairman Brendan Carr.
Hey, thank you so much for coming in. I think I have felt your spectral presence through a lot of these interviews as people talk about their renewed passion for local investments.
Well, good to see you. Thanks for the applause. I kind of thought maybe more tomatoes would come my way, but I'll take the applause.
We positioned them under each seat for
to see how this goes.
If anybody needs. So I just watched a video of you on top of climbing a broadcast tower, which it seemed terrifying, and I couldn't tell if you were pretending not to be scared or just actually not scared.
100%. So I was up Monday, 2,000 feet atop a broadcast tower with a tower crew. And actually, I am pretty scared of heights, but you kind of have to just put that out of your mind, focus on what's in front of you, not let the intrusive thoughts win.
Like a slight quaver in your voice.
Yeah, exactly.
But it reminded me, the FCC's core powers as concerned basically the most troubled, oldest 20th century chunks of this industry, broadcast TV, terrestrial radio. And I guess I wonder I'm asking some big picture questions before we get into sort of more specific policies. But I do wonder that as broadcast just becomes a shrinking part of the industry. I mean, Max asked Catherine Marr earlier, shouldn't you just get rid of all the radio, be a podcast company, and get out of Brendan Carr's sort of, kill zone? Do you think that, but it's going to give you a shrinking role in the marketplace of ideas? And I wonder if you think that we should expand the government's role into other kinds of media.
Well, look, I think a couple things. The FCC's jurisdiction obviously covers a lot of different areas, from mobile wireless to all sorts of new technologies. The satellite industry is a really growing and big area. When it comes to media in particular, across the media sector, there's a unique set of speakers which are licensed by the FCC, these broadcasters. And for years, the FCC sort of stepped back from enforcing the public interest obligation. If you're a person on the street, if you're a podcaster, you don't have an obligation to operate in what's called the public interest. But if you have a license,
I know, but I'm asking if they should, basically.
Well, these are decisions
because these broadcast things. I mean, at some point they're going to be gone, and DOJ is going to come and shut down that part of the FCC.
Look,
so I guess I'm curious if you think that enforcing the government enforcing that obligation across media is important beyond the sort of narrowing slice of it that you have access to.
Our job should be to enforce the laws passed by Congress. What Congress decided is that if you're going to get this unique right, which is using a natural resources, the spectrum, to broadcast, then you have to do so and operate in the public interest. That's the decision Congress made. Now, I'm totally open to someone making an argument and going to Congress and say, look, this is a very odd situation where you've got people that seem to be competing with each other, podcasters, licensed broadcasters, and they have very asymmetrical regulatory obligations. And you can make an argument for coming into Congress to level the playing field, but unless and until they do that, it should be our job at the FCC to step in and enforce the laws, and that's what we're doing.
And if you were to level that playing field, which way would you level it?
That would be up for Congress to decide.
But you have a lot of opinions.
Well, I do, but ultimately that's for Congress to decide. They've said that for broadcasters, it's an obligation to serve the public interest. And I should step back and say this. Look, when you think about media, obviously trust in media as a general matter, we're here in the Gallup building, there's a recent Gallup survey on this, is at an all-time low. Less than, I think, 31% have a lot of trust in the media right now.
And Jim rolled out those numbers earlier.
Right. But I think you have to separate a little bit. This is one of the things that I've tried to do with the FCC. I think you'll see a lot of my regulations sort of reflect this, which is if you look at the national programmers, the national news media, that's where there's a lot of lack of trust. But if you separate it to the level that's actually regulated by the FCC, local broadcasters, people actually trust their local broadcasters. They trust their local journalists. They see them at the post office, at the grocery store. So one of the things I'm trying to do is re-empower the local broadcasters to feel like they have the freedom to serve their local communities because they have these relationships with the national programmers that I don't think is entirely healthy. So I want to re-empower those local broadcasters to serve the public interest.
And I'm not sure if you heard, but Cesar Conde very specifically basically said we're going to be pushing resources out of the center toward the locals. Catherine Marr talked about something kind of similar. Do you feel like that you're already forcing policy changes to these organizations basically by kind of jawboning it?
Well, jawboning or otherwise, yes, I would hope that things are changing. But look, I think that...
But do you think they're changing in reaction to you?
It's possible, but I think if you work in the industry itself, you should want it to change. Again, when you look at those poll numbers coming down and trust in national media absolutely bottoming out, I think the industry should stop and reflect on what they're doing. I'm reminded of the 5 stages of grief, right? Where sort of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I think for a lot of the national news media, they're working their way through those stages. I see a lot of denial about the lack of trust. I see some anger, maybe some bargaining. Some of you maybe are depressed. I think that's a good thing, because if you're depressed, you're just one step away from acceptance, which is the solution. But I think there needs to be some real reflection.
I think the sixth stage, though, in this field is spin-off.
Okay.
And I know everyone appreciates your advice, but you're here, right? But you're a regulator, right? You're a government official, and for people who care about free expression, which I think both of us, the framers of the Constitution, just the typical long-standing American view is that vastly the biggest threat to free expression in the United States is the government, is you. And you wrote in 2021 a newsroom's decision about what stories to cover, how to frame them should be beyond the reach of any government official. And I wonder, has your view on that changed now that you're in power?
Look, what I've said is that the greatest threat that we have seen over the last several years really has come from large social media companies that have amassed incredible amounts of power. The social media companies got more power over more speech than any institution in history. And what we saw them doing with that power was discriminating against viewpoints, and the government was involved. The government, particularly the Biden administration, was pressuring social media companies to shut down core political speech. You had Mark Zuckerberg last summer put out a letter sort of saying we felt pressured to do that. My position is we want more speech, not less. That's my approach on...
But you're not a cable news commentator. You are a government official who can threaten companies, can impact their businesses. Don't you, it seems like you no longer think the government is the main threat to speech now that you're the government.
Well, I think the government should follow the law. President Trump issued an executive order to stop government officials from calling into social media companies and asking them to take down posts. I think that's a good thing. But look,
because now you do it on Twitter.
Well, look, you've got social media companies on the one hand, and you've got, again, licensed broadcasters on the other. If people don't want to have the public interest obligation, it's my job to enforce it.
Yeah.
If people want to change that, they can go to Congress. But if you're going to have a license to be a broadcaster, it comes with something called you have to serve the public interest. And if you don't want to do that, that's okay. And I will give you the address of the FCC. And if you're a broadcaster, you don't want to serve the public interest, you are free to turn your license in, and you can go podcast and you can go over the top. But as long as Congress says that you have unique access to spectrum, valuable spectrum, we can find something to do with that spectrum.
I know, it's terrifying. For those of, thank God I'm not, I live on the internet. But the public interest, and you're by all accounts a very, very good lawyer, and I'm nervous about sort of tangling with you on legal definitions. But I'm curious, and this is just something sort of explanatory. The public interest, you've suggested sort of a consultative process on defining the public interest.
Yeah, I'm open to that.
Yeah, in the absence of that, it's defined by sort of an existing body of law that I think you feel like isn't totally complete, and then by your gut, where do we draw in the absence of this definition? Yep. Where do we draw? How do we know what the public interest is, other than just sort of asking you?
Yeah,
and the president.
One thing that's been the guide star through the FCC's public interest standard is localism, serving the needs of your local community. Again, I think we've gotten so much national news media sort of coming down from these national programmers into the local communities. I think I want to re-empower them. Local news, local sports. I think that's a good thing. But again, look, when you come to sort of trust and you talk about jawboning and things like that, just step back for a second. When you think about the last 2 or 3 weeks, how many of you have written, if you're journalists, or seen lots of stories about the FCC and CBS and seeking comment on moving forward with the complaint against CBS? Raise of hands if people have heard about the FCC doing that.
There's so much news. We got a few here.
A lot of hands.
Some FCC junkies in here.
Okay. How many people here, again, sort of thinking about a 2-week period, let's go back to August of 2023. How many of you remember writing stories about the FCC seeking comment on not renewing a Fox broadcast station license? Okay? I would argue that that is the definition of media bias right there. It's not just what you cover, it's what you don't cover. And so the FCC has this history of looking at broadcasters, of taking these actions, but it's the last couple of weeks in particular that people say, well, it's unprecedented. Well, it's not unprecedented if you had bothered to actually look at what the FCC is doing. And one other thing,
but look,
there's a licensed broadcaster.
That story a little bit, though, because I think you sort of shorthanded it.
There's a licensed broadcaster, Sinclair. They have something like 200 license renewals that came up at the FCC over the last 4 years. How many of those 200 license renewals over the last 4 years do you think the FCC approved?
I do not know.
Zero. Zero. It is basically unprecedented to have an entity with that many license renewals come up over a 4-year period and have the FCC approve none of them. So I think that there should be some questions asked about that. And I think that's the type of thing that I think would go to restoring trust in media, because it feels like there's a lot of attention on some actions at the FCC and complete silence and cover up on others.
I mean, I've talked to people at the FCC through the years who generally felt the FCC was undercovered, but it sounds like the argument you're making, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that the FCC in the previous administration was acting against, or at least looking into, conservative media inappropriately, and that you want to right the ship by inappropriately looking into liberal media.
What I'm saying is the FCC is a place...
No, but really, that's not what you're doing.
What I'm saying is the FCC is a place that operates by case law and by precedent.
Yeah.
And these cases and precedent that were developed over the last 4 years were apparently not controversial when the Democrats were in charge, and I'm surprised that applying the same precedents is now considered controversial.
But you thought, I mean, you said at the time, you thought they were partisan and inappropriate, basically, right?
There are things that the FCC does that once they do them, that creates the precedent, that creates the case law, that creates the thing that the FCC is supposed to follow. What we're doing right now is following the law that the FCC has developed over the last 4 years. But I'm surprised that it's controversial now, but wasn't then. You
know, it's funny. When I talk to, I feel like I'm being trolled here. And when I talk to...
By me?
Yes. And when I
People rarely call me a troll.
Actually, it's funny because I did talk to a lot of your friends and enemies in preparing for this. And one thing that all of your friends and your critics alike said was, this is a really smart guy, good lawyer, really pleasant to work with, whether you're a Democrat or Republican.
Not good looking, apparently.
Didn't get into your physical appearance. But that when they look at your kind of public presence on cable, on social media, that you're kind of bombastic and trolly. You talk about shock and awe for the swamp, patriot versus patriotic Americans, and they wonder if it's performative for the president.
Look, I think I joined the FCC as a staffer in 2012. I've had lots of different jobs there, lots of different opportunities there. I absolutely love the job that I'm doing. I think if you look at everything that I've been doing, it's consistent over the course of my conduct over years.
But just to go back, 'cause I think the point you were trying to make before was important. You were saying that there were precedents of, essentially, in your view, partisan persecution of conservative media outlets that were set, and that you are now applying to sort of institute partisan persecution of liberal media outlets? Is that literally what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that we're coming out of a period, in my view, where there was a lot of weaponization at the FCC. Your last name dictated the FCC's treatment. When Elon Musk got an award for $800 million to bring high-speed internet to rural America, the FCC, in my view, for political reasons, revoked that award. And the loser there was the American people that were supposed to get service. Now, if your last name was Soros, you got very different treatment. So Soros came in at the end of the Biden administration and purchased 200 radio stations. And for the first time ever, the full commission gave a special Soros shortcut for him to obtain it.
So is your goal to reverse that or to end it?
The FCC is a place that operates by case law and common law, and when we set precedent, the agency follows it, and that's what we're doing. We're giving everybody
doesn't this just mean that the next Democratic chairman is bound by the same case law to turn around and go after Fox and Sinclair?
Well, again, the last FCC was the one that sought public comment on not reviewing a Fox broadcast license. The last FCC was the one that didn't renew any Sinclairs.
It sounds like you're choosing to deepen this cycle rather than try to end it.
I'm happy to apply the case law that the Democrats set.
Interesting. So it sounds like your targets have been basically exclusively among outlets that Trump criticizes. And so we've talked to a lot of, like, the whole day has been basically news executives talking about how they, even if they feel like everything they're doing is trustworthy, like, how do they persuade people it's trustworthy? Do you worry about that? Do you worry about the appearance of partisanship, or do you not really care how you appear?
I don't care how I appear. Look,
because government obviously struggles with trust as well.
We made it. We finally got above the news industry. Yes. So I don't know. Listen, here's what I think what corruption would be. I think it would be corrupt for me to say, well, you've got to strike this percentage of wins for Republicans and this percentage of wins for Democrats. If I don't get that right balance, I'm going to get hit for leaning too far this way or too far that way. In my view, that's the very definition of corruption. What I've told people is that everybody is going to get a fair shake at the FCC. We're going to apply the law, we're going to apply the precedent, and frankly, I think it's a break from what we've seen.
A lot of your career, and I think some of what you wrote in the FTC chapter of Project 2025, was about, very traditional Republican sense that these regulatory agencies were out of hand, that they were, seizing power to regulate things that they didn't really have congressional mandate for. Net neutrality was a fight you fought for a long time to keep for a more hands-off approach to business and innovation. In this role, you've been reaching quite a bit into private companies around, I would say specifically NBC's DEI practices, for instance. And whatever you think of that, that's a private business doing stuff in the private sector, and you're a federal you're a federal regulator sort of reaching into it, which seems a bit counter
Your
to
position
that.
is if a private company is engaged in discrimination based on race, the federal government should have nothing to say about it.
Of course not, but I'm not sure. It is not, I think, traditionally the FCC's mandate. There are lots of federal agencies that
We have EEO
regulate
rules that licensed entities and cable companies like Comcast have to follow.
So is your view, reluctantly you've been forced into expanding government a bit? Or do you
I don't feel
or have
reluctant,
you
no.
rethought a little your own approach, like that sort of earlier, just sort of blanket? I'm trying to ask a sincere question here.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on. Look, I'm not a fundamentalist libertarian. I don't believe that there should be no role for government, but we're doing two things at the same time. On the one hand, we're running an agenda, although it's not getting as much attention, that is very deregulatory in nature. So for instance, when it comes to the space economy, when it comes to permitting, we are deregulating in ways that's going to unleash the private sector to build. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we have other mandates that are public safety mandates, national security mandates, in my view, these EEO obligations that are more regulatory. And we're going to be running both of these things at the same time. But to say that you're a Republican, so you can only deregulate, is not the way that I approach it.
Has your own thinking changed, just genuinely, has your own thinking on that question changed? Because I at least I think you used to be seen really very much as a deregulatory voice in a kind of reflexive way.
I've seen these stories before that say, well, he used to be very libertarian and now he's not, but I'm not really sure what the sort of the timeline is.
You don't feel like your thinking
everybody
evolved
changes,
on it.
everybody evolves. But look, I've been a commissioner for 6 years. I always look at sort of two things. Is there sort of a concentration of power, one? Two, coupled with harmful conduct. So again, when you look at Silicon Valley and social media, lots of power, and I think they used it in discriminatory way. There's other markets that we regulate where there's a lot of power, but you're not seeing discriminatory conduct. For instance, Title II net neutrality was one where you can argue that ISPs have a lot of power. I don't think that reflects the current marketplace, but they weren't exercising it in a discriminatory way to censor people. So the absence of market power with discriminatory conduct results in, Title II regulation was an inappropriate fit. But for social media, where you've got lots of power, and I think they're abusing that market power coupled together, then I think it's appropriate for the FCC to say, let's take another look at Section 230, which is in the Communications Act.
That's a great example. It's in the Communications Act.
It is in the
Communications Act. Supreme Court has recently ruled pretty strongly, and again, you can explain how I'm wrong about this as a lawyer, but that regulatory agencies are not allowed to go rooting around regulation, looking for new mandates, to go dive into the private sector and enforce things on them. And I think a lot of people think your Section 230 aspirations are going to ultimately hit a legal wall. And it just feels like you are really interested in expanding the power of government in a way that feels new.
Well, I'll explain to you why I think it's apples and oranges. And I think Title II is a good example. So Title II is an example where we have these sets of regulations, heavy-handed regulations, that for years did not apply to this thing called the internet. And so the FCC was saying, we're going to newly apply this to the internet. That's a big leap. That's sort of a major question.
Do you feel like Congress, there's language in there, you said Congress wants that? That passes the sort of Chevron deference issues?
In the context of Title II, there's not sufficient language from Congress to do that. So in my view, heavy regulatory structure, a new question of whether this thing should be regulated that way by the FCC. 230 is a different type of thing. 230 is social media content moderation is regulated by Congress through Section 230, and so there's a question of how should that thing apply to social media. So it's a sort of apples and oranges difference.
You're so eager to get a government agency into the business of these private companies.
Well, again, I'm eager to apply the law passed by Congress. There's a public interest obligation on broadcasters. There's Section 230 that applies to social media, and I'm happy to apply the law that Congress set forward.
A question on the Musk thing you raised earlier, because I think that's actually a really interesting case, where Starlink, to a lot of people, seems pretty obviously a great way to get broadband to people in rural areas.
Yeah.
Could be a lot cheaper than rolling wires. I'm not familiar enough with the details of how it got shut down to really have opinions on whether it was partisan or not, but seems like you will be in a position potentially to authorize it. A lot of people think that's a pretty reasonable policy. And I think that'll be, Musk has a lot of great companies. How do you, Is there any extra burden because of Musk's huge role in government to avoid an appearance of the conflict of interest? As you say, this is a policy you supported before. I'm not really casting doubt on it. But how do you navigate that with Musk being this central player in government when you're, opening up billions of dollars to his companies?
Yeah, to me, it's the same as before. If Starlink or Musk is pushing an issue and he's right 100% of the time at the FCC, we're going to side with him 100%. If he's pushing issues and he's wrong every single time, then he's going to lose every single time at the FCC. We're just going to give everybody a fair shake.
So last question here. Donald Trump was tweeting recently that Comcast or Comcast should be paying, I'm looking for the quote actually, vast sums of money because of MSNBC's programming. What is he talking about?
Sorry, could you read it?
He said that because of it was not I wouldn't say it was a legal brief. He said that because of MSNBC and it being bad, that Comcast should pay vast sums of money. Is that an FCC issue?
I'm not sure I'm tracking exactly. You're saying this is in the context of...
I'm not really tracking either.
Okay.
But Trump tweeted, or so truthed.
If you can show it to me, I'll look at it. If you can show it to me, I'll look at it.
Well, the quote is that Comcast specifically owes the American government vast sums of money because MSNBC, because of what he sees as bias on MSNBC. Is that a FCC? Do you think that's... what's he talking about?
If I can see the quote, I'll look at it. Yeah.
Okay. You didn't see the tweet. It wasn't directed at you.
If it was, I didn't see it.
How do you use that? I guess that's not how the president communicates with you. All right. Well, thank you so much. How does he communicate with you?
Yeah, it was fun. It was good to be with you. I appreciate it.
How do you communicate with the president? Actually,
how do I communicate with the president?
Sorry, I was actually honestly, I'm kind of surprised that a truth on the subject of of media regulation didn't make it your way. But how do you? As a head of an independent agency that doesn't report up to the Congress, how do you kind of communicate with White House needs?
It's pretty standard practice. We've had, the Biden White House dealing with the FCC in the last couple of years, the Trump White House dealing with the FCC in years before. There's standard practice, standard protocols that we go through, and that's what we're following. Nothing out of the ordinary at this point.
You're not just refreshing Truth Social.
I do refresh Truth Social from time to time.
You missed a great one.
Yeah, I'll have to look up.
I'll come back to you.
I'll have to look up this one, though.
I'll ask you about it at the reception. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much
Thanks,
for joining
appreciate
us.
it. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
To close today's event, please welcome back Semafor co-founder and CEO Justin B. Smith.